Imagine taking someone's seat on a crowded plane, only to find out the man you dismissed not only belonged there, but actually owned the entire airline. Airports bring out every side of people, their impatience, their stress, their entitlement, and sometimes their absolute worst behavior. But on one particular evening at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, a single decision by one woman turned a routine boarding process into a story that would leave strangers stunned, a plane full of passengers whispering, and the internet roaring within hours. It began with Colleen Strafford, a 49-year-old consultant from Dallas. She was tired, irritated, and ready to be home. Her connecting flight had been delayed for over 3 hours, and her expression showed every minute of her frustration. When boarding for first class was finally announced, Colleen marched forward, eyes scanning the cabin like someone ready to claim victory. Her gaze landed on an empty seat in row 2A, right by the window. Without hesitation, she slid into it, placing her leather jacket across the armrest as though it were her territory. A sigh of relief escaped her lips, the kind of sound someone makes when they feel they've secured something they deserve. But she hadn't checked the boarding pass again, and only moments later, the rightful owner of that seat appeared. Jordan Kincaid, just 38, walked down the aisle with a calm, deliberate stride. His charcoal gray suit was pressed, his tie neatly knotted, and his expression unreadable. He was young for his position, but everything about the way he carried himself suggested confidence without arrogance. In his hand, he held his boarding pass, eyes fixed on the seat that was supposed to be his. He stopped politely beside Colleen and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low but firm. "I believe you're in my seat. This is 2A. Colleen barely looked at him. Instead, she gave a half smile, the kind people wear when they feel above correction. "I'm sure you've made a mistake," she replied, waving her hand as if brushing off an inconvenience. "Check your ticket again." A hush spread through the nearby rows. A middle-aged man in 3B leaned slightly forward, pretending to read his magazine but listening intently. A young college student across the aisle adjusted her earbuds, pressing pause to catch every word. Even the flight attendant paused in her greeting of passengers to glance toward the tension growing in row 2. Jordan didn't argue. Instead, he calmly held out his boarding pass. "It says 2A, right here." The attendant stepped closer and looked down at the ticket. "Yes, ma'am," she confirmed gently to Colleen. "This is Mr. Kincaid's assigned seat." Colleen's lips tightened. She pulled her jacket closer, refusing to move. "Well, I'm already here," she said with a tone that mixed annoyance with authority. "Can't he just sit somewhere else?" Gasps and whispers fluttered through the cabin. People exchanged looks, eyebrows raised. One man muttered under his breath, "Unbelievable." Jordan's eyes didn't waver. His calmness made the moment sharper, as though he'd been in situations like this before. He didn't raise his voice, didn't make a scene. He simply stood there, waiting. The attendant shifted awkwardly. "Ma'am, we'll need you to take your assigned seat. This is a full flight." Colleen sighed heavily, loud enough for everyone around her to hear. "Figures," she muttered, not looking at Jordan. "Always trying to push boundaries." That one sentence hung in the air like smoke. The college student across the aisle glanced up sharply, eyes wide. The man in 3B shook his head. A woman further back whispered, "Did she really just say that?" Jordan heard it too. His jaw tightened for the briefest moment before his composure returned. He adjusted his cufflinks, almost like he was resetting himself. "I'd like to speak to the captain," he said evenly, not out of anger, but with a quiet authority that caught even the flight attendant off guard. Passengers shifted in their seats. Phones appeared in hands, subtle but unmistakable, recording what had become more than just a seating dispute. Everyone sensed that this was no longer about a chair in row 2. It was about something much bigger, something that was about to blow wide open. But no one could have predicted the shock that was waiting just a few minutes later. The air in the cabin grew heavy. People weren't just boarding anymore, they were watching. A small circle of tension had formed around row 2, and in the middle of it stood Jordan Kincaid and Colleen Strafford, two strangers locked in a battle over respect that neither had expected when they showed up at the airport. The flight attendant cleared her throat, her smile straining under the weight of the situation. "Ma'am, please," she said to Colleen. "I need you to move to your assigned seat so we can continue boarding." Colleen leaned back in 2A, crossing her arms like a child refusing to give up her toy. "This is ridiculous," she said, voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I've been traveling all day. I just want to get home. Why can't he just take another seat? Jordan stayed composed, but his silence was louder than her words. He stood tall, boarding pass still in hand, never raising his voice. Passengers studied him carefully, his calm demeanor, his sharp suit, his quiet refusal to be dismissed. Finally he spoke. With all due respect, this is my assigned seat. I'm not asking for special treatment, just the seat I purchased. Colleen gave a laugh that wasn't really a laugh, more like a scoff. Purchased, right? She muttered. You know what? Fine. Let's see what the captain thinks of this. Her attempt at sarcasm backfired. The attendant nodded quickly. I'll notify the captain, she said, her relief almost visible as she hurried down the aisle. The murmurs grew louder. A man in row 4 leaned toward his neighbor. You hear what she said to him? His neighbor gave a slow nod, eyes never leaving the confrontation. A young woman a few rows back whispered, This is going to end up online. Jordan adjusted his tie. He finally looked directly at Colleen, his expression calm but deliberate. You didn't even check my ticket before deciding I was in the wrong, he said softly. Colleen rolled her eyes, shifting uncomfortably but refusing to stand. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. You could have just sat somewhere else and saved everyone the trouble. The words hung in the air. Everyone knew it wasn't just about a seat. It was about being told in front of dozens of strangers that you didn't belong where you clearly did. Minutes later, the captain appeared. He was a tall man with silver hair and steady posture, walking with the kind of authority that immediately settled passengers, but when he reached Jordan, his professional demeanor shifted into something warmer. Mr. Kincaid, he said, extending his hand with a genuine smile. Good to see you again. How are you this evening? A collective gasp rippled across the cabin. Phones tilted higher, eyes widened. This wasn't the kind of greeting you gave to just any frequent flyer. Jordan shook the captain's hand firmly. Doing well, thank you. Looking forward to getting this flight underway. The captain nodded. Of course, we'll make sure of it. Then his gaze shifted to Colleen. His voice was polite, but unyielding. Ma'am, this gentleman is in his assigned seat. I need you to return to your own, so we can depart on time. Colleen's cheeks flushed crimson. Her words stumbled as she tried to recover her authority. Wait, you know him? The captain didn't hesitate. Yes. Mr. Kincaid is the chief executive of this airline. Now please, let's not delay the other passengers any further. The silence that followed was deafening. Colleen's eyes darted from the captain to Jordan and then to the rows of passengers who were openly staring now. Her face tightened. She grabbed her jacket with quick, jerky movements and stood. As she squeezed past Jordan, she muttered just loud enough for him to hear, Well, good for you. Jordan didn't flinch. He simply stepped aside and slid into 2A, calm as ever. The captain gave him a respectful nod before returning to the cockpit, leaving the passengers to absorb what they had just witnessed. The atmosphere shifted. Whispers darted through the cabin like sparks. One woman whispered to her husband, He's the CEO. He looks so young. Another passenger pulled out his phone and began typing furiously. Colleen sat down in her actual seat, eyes fixed on the window, her embarrassment radiating like heat. The defiance that once marked her posture had melted into quiet humiliation. Jordan leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes briefly. He didn't gloat. He didn't even acknowledge the stares. His silence said everything. It wasn't about proving himself right. It was about letting the truth stand on its own. But the story wasn't finished yet, because the moment passengers began sharing what they'd seen, the incident was about to leave the cabin and hit the world outside. The plane hadn't even taken off yet, and already the story of row 2 was traveling faster than any aircraft ever could. Passengers sat taller in their seats, stealing glances at Colleen Strafford, who now looked like she wanted to vanish into the upholstery. Her face was rigid, her hands tight around the strap of her purse. She hadn't expected the entire cabin to hear her muttered words, or for them to sting quite so sharply in the ears of strangers. Across the aisle, a college student named Tyler Mendez whispered into his phone, his voice barely above a breath. I'm telling you, this lady tried to steal his seat and then said some messed up stuff. And he's the CEO. I'll send you the video. He angled his phone down, pretending to scroll, but he was recording. 2 rows back, a middle-aged couple exchanged quiet looks. The wife leaned toward her husband and murmured, I can't believe she said that right in front of him. The husband shook his head, eyes narrowing toward Colleen. Meanwhile, Jordan Kincaid sat in his rightful seat, the very picture of composure. He fastened his belt, opened the airline's magazine, and flipped a page as though nothing had happened. But the passengers saw it differently. His calmness wasn't ordinary. It was deliberate, the kind of stillness that spoke louder than an outburst ever could. Colleen, however, couldn't sit in silence for long. Her voice cut through the cabin in a low but sharp tone. "People are acting like I committed a crime. I was just tired and sat down. That's all." Jordan turned his head slowly toward her. His voice carried just enough weight to be heard by everyone nearby. "What you said after mattered more than the seat." The words landed heavily. Several passengers froze mid-motion, ears tuned in like radios. Colleen's eyes flicked toward him, but she didn't meet his gaze. "You're making it sound like I said something terrible. I didn't mean anything by it." Jordan didn't raise his tone. He didn't need to. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he replied evenly. "When you assume someone doesn't belong, that's not just about a seat on a plane. That's about something bigger." The silence after his words was piercing. People shifted uncomfortably. A man in 3B muttered, "He's right," under his breath. Colleen bristled. "Oh, so now I'm some kind of villain because I was tired and frustrated?" Her words trembled on the edge of defensiveness, but she couldn't quite disguise the shame underneath. Jordan looked at her calmly. "No one said you're a villain, but sometimes a moment like this makes us face the parts of ourselves we don't like to admit are there." That was it, the line that cut through the cabin like a blade. Even those who hadn't heard Colleen's original mutter now understood. And it wasn't just her who felt the weight of it. It was everyone who'd ever made a snap judgment, everyone who'd ever let frustration disguise prejudice. Phones captured every second. Some passengers typed furiously into notes apps, others whispered commentary to their seatmates. The story wasn't staying inside this plane. Colleen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, finally snapping back with a weak defense. "Look, you don't know me. You don't know what kind of person I am." Jordan's eyes softened, not with sympathy, but with something steadier. "You're right. I don't. But in this moment, what you said spoke louder than who you say you are." The attendant returned, quietly checking overhead bins, her posture stiff as though she, too, felt the weight of the exchange. The cabin seemed to exhale all at once when she moved on, but the tension never really lifted. Passengers weren't just observers anymore. They were witnesses. They knew this wasn't about a boarding dispute. It had become a snapshot of the world, playing out in real time in row 2. Colleen's eyes darted around, searching for allies, but no one met her gaze. She turned to the window, lips pressed tight, her reflection staring back at her with the same disapproval she saw in the faces around her. Jordan went back to his magazine, flipping another page with deliberate calm. It wasn't about winning. It was about not letting her words define him. And yet, in a strange way, his restraint only magnified the weight of her misstep. The plane eventually filled, the overhead bins closed, the safety instructions began. But no one was paying attention to the usual announcements. Their thoughts lingered on what they'd just seen, on what they'd just heard. But the cabin didn't know yet that the real impact wouldn't come from inside this plane. It was waiting for them on the ground, once the world outside saw the footage. The flight attendants had finished their routine checks, but the atmosphere in the first few rows was still tense. Everyone's eyes flickered between Colleen Strafford, stiff in her seat with her arms folded tight, and Jordan Kincaid, relaxed yet unreadable, flipping through the safety card as though nothing had happened. But then the moment that sealed everything arrived. The captain himself emerged from the cockpit, walking down the aisle with the kind of presence that silenced every whisper. His hat tucked neatly under his arm. His steps were steady, deliberate. He wasn't coming to reprimand anyone. He was coming to speak to someone very specific. Passengers leaned into the aisle, their curiosity spilling over. The phones that had been lowered for takeoff came back up, angled carefully so as not to be obvious. Everyone knew something was about to happen. "Mr. Kincaid," the captain said warmly as he stopped at row 2. His voice was clear, carrying just enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. He extended his hand without hesitation. "Always a pleasure to have you on board. How are you tonight?" Gasps and whispers rippled through the rows. Some mouths literally dropped open. This wasn't how pilots greeted passengers, not even frequent flyers. This was different. This was personal. Jordan reached out, shook his hand firmly, and allowed the faintest smile. "Good evening, Captain. I'm well, thank you. Appreciate you checking in." The captain nodded, his respect obvious. "Of course. We'll make sure you're comfortable. If there's anything you need, let us know." Colleen's face drained of color. Her eyes widened as she looked between the captain and Jordan, disbelief settling in her expression. She stammered before she could catch herself. "Wait, hold on. You know him?" The captain turned his gaze to her, polite but firm. "Yes, ma'am. This is Mr. Jordan Kincaid, our chief executive officer." The sentence hit the cabin like thunder. A young man in row 5 whispered, "No way." A woman clutched her husband's arm. Across the aisle, Tyler Mendez's phone shook slightly as he tried to keep recording without laughing from sheer shock. Colleen's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to argue, but no words formed. Her face went red, then pale, then red again. She pulled her jacket tighter across her lap, her hands fumbling as though clinging to any sense of control. The captain, however, wasn't lingering. He gave Jordan a final nod. "We'll make sure this flight runs smoothly. Welcome back, sir." Then he turned and made his way back to the cockpit, leaving a trail of hushed awe behind him. Colleen whispered, half to herself, half to anyone who would listen. "CEO? He's the CEO?" Jordan finally looked her way again. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "You didn't think I belonged here. But not only do I belong, I built the very thing you're sitting in right now." It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was devastating. The truth carried its own weight. Several passengers exchanged glances that said everything without words. The moment she had dismissed him, the moment she muttered under her breath, had just boomeranged back with a vengeance. Colleen's lips pressed together, her shoulders sagged. For the first time, she seemed small in her seat, diminished not by insult, but by her own assumptions being exposed. Meanwhile, Jordan turned his attention away. He pulled a notepad from his bag and began scribbling a few lines as though preparing for work even before takeoff. His indifference to her discomfort only magnified the humiliation, because he didn't need to argue. The truth had already done the work for him. Behind them, passengers whispered in rapid bursts. "He's so young to be a CEO. I read about him last year. Forbes did a feature." "She really tried to take his seat?" "Oh, it's going online. No way this stays here." Tyler couldn't resist anymore. He texted the clip to his friend with the caption, "The woman who picked the wrong fight at 30,000 feet. Wait till you see this." Jordan didn't care. He wasn't performing for anyone. He had faced worse before. But for the people around him, it was unforgettable. The captain's respect, the truth revealed in a single sentence. The reality that everything they had just seen was not just awkward, but historic. Colleen sat rigid, staring out the window, pretending the sky beyond could swallow her whole. But there was no hiding. Everyone had seen. Everyone had heard. But the humiliation in that cabin was just the beginning, because the world outside was waiting, and within hours, millions would witness the exact same scene. The captain's return to the cockpit didn't erase what had just happened. It cemented it. The truth was out, and now the energy in the cabin had shifted. Boarding wrapped up quickly, but no one was talking about seatbelts or tray tables anymore. They were talking about Jordan Kincaid. Colleen Strafford sat in her real seat now, a few rows back, her body turned stiffly toward the window. She avoided eye contact, but her humiliation was impossible to hide. Her face flushed, her breathing shallow, and every so often her eyes darted toward Jordan in row 2, as if trying to gauge whether he was looking at her. He wasn't. Jordan leaned back, headphones resting loosely around his neck, his notepad still open. His composure was unnerving in its own way. Where another person might have gloated or shot smug glances, Jordan was focused, as though this incident had barely registered in his world. That calmness said more than a victory speech ever could. Still, the cabin was alive with hushed voices. The young woman across the aisle whispered to her neighbor, "I mean, did you see her face when she found out? Priceless." Her neighbor nodded. "I almost felt bad for her. Almost." A man in business attire leaned toward his colleague in the row behind. "Kincaid, huh? That's the guy who bought Mid-Atlantic Airways a few years ago, right? Youngest airline CEO in the country." His colleague gave a low whistle, and she told him to sit somewhere else. Unreal. Phones were out again, though discreetly this time. Text messages flew through the cabin. "You won't believe what I just saw," one read. "Lady tried to steal CEO's seat. Whole thing blew up." Jordan, sensing the stares, finally slipped off his headphones and glanced down the aisle. His voice carried enough to be heard by those in the first few rows, but it wasn't confrontational. It was measured, almost reflective. "Everyone here just wants to get home," he said. "That includes me. I'd appreciate it if we could let the matter rest and have a peaceful flight." The tone was so even, so deliberately calm, that it quieted the whispers almost instantly. It wasn't a demand, it was a reminder, and it worked. But Colleen couldn't stay silent. Her pride still smoldered, and though she knew every eye was on her, she leaned forward in her seat and called out toward him. "You think you're better than everyone just because you run this place?" The words made heads turn again. The flight attendants exchanged nervous glances, unsure if they should intervene. Jordan looked back over his shoulder, his expression steady. "No," he said simply, "but I don't think anyone's better than anyone else either. And that's the difference." That single line landed harder than any argument could have. Some passengers nodded subtly, others murmured under their breath. One man whispered, "That's how you shut it down." Colleen shrank back into her seat, her lips pressed tight. She had nothing left to throw. Every attempt to reclaim her pride only exposed her further. As the plane finally taxied down the runway, the tension began to shift into something else. Reflection. Passengers replayed the scene in their heads. Some felt uncomfortable at how easily they had believed Colleen's authority at first. Others admired Jordan's restraint, his ability to let dignity do the talking. The flight attendant closest to row 2 approached quietly, crouching slightly beside Jordan's seat. "Sir, I just wanted to apologize for the trouble earlier," she whispered. Jordan gave her a small smile. "Not necessary. You handled it professionally. These things happen." Her relief was visible. "Thank you," she said, straightening and moving on. That was the difference. Where Colleen had tried to exert control through dismissal and assumption, Jordan exerted it through grace and composure, and the passengers felt it. They felt the contrast between arrogance and dignity play out in real time. For the rest of the flight, Colleen stayed silent, her eyes glued to the dark window outside. Jordan, on the other hand, returned to his notepad, writing ideas that no one could see. He had shut the book on the confrontation long before the plane lifted off the ground, but the passengers hadn't. They knew the story wasn't going to stay locked inside this aircraft. They knew the second wheels touched the tarmac, the world outside would be waiting for it. But what they didn't realize yet was just how quickly the footage, the whispers, and the details would explode beyond the cabin walls, spreading like wildfire across the internet. By the time the plane landed in Dallas, row 2 had become more than a memory. It had become content. The quiet glow of phone screens lit up the cabin before the wheels even touched the ground. Clips were trimmed, captions written, and hashtags added. The passengers didn't just witness the clash between Colleen Strafford and Jordan Kincaid. They carried it with them into the digital world. Tyler Mendez, the college student who had filmed the clearest video, uploaded it within minutes of landing. The caption was blunt. "Woman takes man's seat in first class, finds out he owns the airline." It was 15 seconds long, shaky but clear enough to show Colleen insisting Jordan sit somewhere else, and the captain's respectful handshake moments later. By the time Tyler grabbed his bag from the overhead bin, the post already had hundreds of likes. By the time he reached baggage claim, it had thousands. By the time he got into his Uber, it was climbing past 100,000 views. News outlets picked it up next. A local Dallas station aired it with the headline, "Airline CEO faces seat showdown with passenger." Then bigger outlets followed. By morning, it was on national broadcasts, framed not just as an awkward in-flight spat, but as a story about assumptions, bias, and humiliation playing out in the most public way possible. Social media, of course, had its field day. Comments poured in beneath the viral video. "She really told the CEO to sit somewhere else? The audacity. This is why you treat everyone with respect. You never know who you're talking to. I don't even care that he's the CEO. That calm clapback was legendary. Imagine being her right now. I'd never show my face again." Memes surfaced before sunrise. Screenshots of Colleen's shocked expression were paired with captions like, "When you realize the man you dismissed signs your pilot's paycheck." Another meme read, She thought he didn't belong in 2A. Turns out he owns row 1 through 40. Jordan Kincaid's name began trending by breakfast. People shared articles about his rise in the aviation industry, about how he'd taken over Mid-Atlantic Airways at 34 and reshaped it into one of the fastest-growing regional carriers in the U.S. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about a humiliating moment on a plane. It was a reflection of his success, his youth, and the grace with which he had handled an insult that could have turned ugly. Colleen Strafford's name didn't trend at first, but the internet is rarely merciful. Before long, someone connected her face to her LinkedIn profile, and the comments turned ruthless. Some called for her resignation from her consulting firm. Others wrote think pieces about entitlement in corporate travel. She deleted her social media accounts within hours, but screenshots ensured nothing truly disappeared. Meanwhile, Jordan said nothing publicly. No interviews, no tweets, no press releases. His silence only fueled the fascination. While people debated what Colleen had meant by her muttered comment, while they dissected every second of her defiance, Jordan kept to his business. That choice, his refusal to cash in on the moment, only amplified the respect he earned online. At airports the next day, passengers whispered his name. Gate agents glanced up from their monitors, wondering if he might walk by. People admired his ability to maintain dignity in the face of a situation where many would have exploded. On talk shows, hosts debated the morale of the story. One commentator said, "This wasn't just about a seat. It was about assumptions people carry with them." She saw him, dismissed him, and then the truth made her look smaller than she ever intended. Another chimed in, "And the irony is, if she'd treated him with respect from the start, no one would even know her name right now." For ordinary people watching the video, the story struck deeper than just gossip. They thought of moments when they'd been underestimated. They thought of times when they'd misjudged someone else. The clip became less about travel and more about human behavior, how pride, bias, and arrogance could collapse in seconds under the weight of truth. And still, Jordan never spoke. He didn't need to. The world had already decided what it saw in him: composure, confidence, and quiet strength. But behind the viral headlines and internet jokes, there was still one more layer waiting: the reflection. Because this wasn't just about Colleen's humiliation or Jordan's dignity, it was about what it meant for everyone watching, including us. By the time the story had been picked apart on morning talk shows, shared across countless feeds, and debated in offices, Jordan Kincaid was already moving on with his day. He had a meeting scheduled downtown, a presentation to prepare, and no time to scroll through the noise. But the passengers who had been on that flight and the millions who had watched the video couldn't stop thinking about it. For Jordan, it wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about becoming a trending topic or watching someone else's embarrassment play out for the world to see. He had dealt with enough in his 38 years to know that chasing validation was pointless. What mattered was the choice he had made in that moment: to meet arrogance with composure and prejudice with calm truth. Later that evening, while walking through Dallas Love Field Airport to catch another flight, a man in his 40s stopped him. "Mr. Kincaid," he said nervously, extending his hand, "I just wanted to say, I saw the video. The way you handled yourself? That was something else. My teenage son showed it to me. We talked about it at dinner last night." Jordan shook his hand firmly. "Thank you. I'm glad it sparked a conversation. That's more important than the video itself." The man nodded, almost relieved. "It did. My son asked me if I'd ever assumed someone didn't belong somewhere, and I had to be honest. I have. It was uncomfortable to admit, but necessary." Jordan smiled faintly before continuing on. That was the part no one online could measure: the private reflections, the awkward but honest talks happening in households across the country because of one 15-second clip. Colleen Strafford, meanwhile, had retreated into silence. She issued no statements, gave no interviews. Her name was dragged through headlines she never wanted, her face plastered across memes she couldn't escape. But in her quiet, she also had to confront the reality of what had happened, not just the humiliation, but the truth of what her words revealed. On the other side of the debate, people discussed whether her life should be ruined over a moment. Some argued she deserved the backlash. Others said everyone makes mistakes, and maybe this one was her chance to learn. What lingered, though, was the undeniable lesson: respect isn't optional. It's not something you hand out based on what you think someone looks like, how they dress, or where you imagine they belong. Because sooner or later, the truth cuts through. Jordan didn't need to prove his worth to Colleen or to anyone on that plane. His career had already spoken for itself. But in that moment, he gave the rest of the world a reminder. Your words have weight, even when you whisper them under your breath. And sometimes, the smallest sentence reveals the biggest cracks in a person's character. Weeks later, the video still circulated, but the tone began to shift. Less focus on Colleen's humiliation, more focus on Jordan's restraint. Leadership blogs dissected his reaction. Universities used the clip in lectures about bias and dignity. One professor in Phoenix told his students, "Notice how he didn't shout, didn't retaliate. He let the truth stand on its own. That's real power." And maybe that's the part that stayed with people most. Not the embarrassment, not the memes, but the calmness of a man who didn't let someone else's words define him. In the end, the story of Row 2 wasn't just about a plane ride. It was about how easily we judge, how quickly we assume, and how profoundly we can be reminded of our own flaws. For some, it was just a viral clip. For others, it was a mirror. If you've stayed with me this far, here's the takeaway. Never underestimate the power of treating people with respect. Whether they're a stranger in line at the airport, the person sitting beside you on a plane, or the CEO of the airline itself. You never know who you're speaking to, but more importantly, you never know what your words will reveal about you. So the next time frustration tempts you to snap, or pride tempts you to dismiss someone, pause. Think. Choose dignity. Because stories like this remind us that seats, titles, and positions don't define who deserves respect. Character does. Thank you for listening to this story. If you want more true-to-life stories that make you think, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next one.